and welcome to the BBK Free Speech podcast. It's me, Caroline Klage, head of the Brain Injury Division. I'm delighted to welcome Michael Clifton and Tess Whitehead from Adaptation Design Limited, who are a specialist property company, and they've done wonderful work for so many of our clients. And we're going to talk about accommodation, our clients' varying accommodation needs, how they can be met and how they help us do that, and the impact, life-changing impact of that, really. So thank you so much, both of you, for giving us your time today. I'm going to ask you both just to give a brief description of what you do, and then we'll have more of a general chat about accommodation.
Okay, so my name is Michael Clifton. I'm an architectural technologist, and I've been working in the industry for about 18 years. My sole focus of my career has been on residential architecture and creating wonderful homes and spaces for people.
Thanks, Michael.
I'm Tess Whitehead, housing occupational therapist. I've been an OT now for nearly 19 years, so it's quite some time. I was in statutory services in housing for about 15 years, and then the rest of the time in independent and private practice. I have two roles within the company at Adaptation Design. So I do clinical work, so I do my housing OT work, but I also head up the property finding, the property search services there, so helping clients look for both purchase and rental properties, both post and pre-litigation. So I get to use my OT skills across both sectors and both sides of the company.
Thank you, both of you. And I know we've had really positive experiences with you both. So Tess, in terms of finding rental properties, properties to purchase, and then Michael coming on board and realising the dream property that perfectly meets our clients' needs, but also done so beautifully, so that they just have the perfect environment to flourish and thrive. And future-proofing, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first of all, Tess, I'd like to ask you for your views on clients' needs, clients who have mobility issues, first of all. So what sort of things would you look for? So if a client came to you and they're not coping in their current house, maybe there are stairs or very narrow corridors, what sort of things would you consider they might need? So clients, they could be spinally injured clients or clients with brain injuries where there are mobility issues. They might be dependent on a wheelchair.
Yeah, absolutely. So I identify those needs right at the very beginning through the assessment process. And as an occupational therapist, there are various sort of frameworks and models of practice. One of the more well-known ones is the PEO, which is the person, the environment and the occupations. Just fancy words, but ultimately what we're doing is breaking everything down and assessing the person, what their injuries, their abilities, their level of function, and obviously what they find more challenging. Then we're assessing the environment. That's obviously the physical environment that they're living in, their home environment, but that also includes social and cultural. That's their sort of their family support and, their sort of their cultural beliefs as well, because that's all part of the environment. And then we're looking at those occupations, and that's kind of anything and everything that we do through our day-to-day lives. So obviously you've got your washing and dressing, those basic personal care skills. They're the more obvious ones, but occupations can refer to absolutely anything like cooking, walking the dog, spending time with the children. So my assessments, whilst I don't ask the questions sort of too formally, the assessment comprises all of those elements, and it's from that then that I can identify what somebody's accommodation needs are. So looking very much at where they are now, does that environment support or hinder them? What are the space requirements? Obviously, we want the environment, the home, to be enabling. Obviously, after a catastrophic injury, we always talk about promoting independence and being able to do things for oneself, but actually sometimes that independence it doesn't look the same as it used to. So I'm looking at how that environment can support that person to enable them to engage fully, participate in things and have more choice and control. It might just look different. So I'm looking at the access. How are they getting in and out of the property? They may not be able to get to the front door quickly enough in adverse weather. So we're then looking at, do we need sort of covered carport area so that they can do that transfer, because it's going to take extra time. They want to be comfortable. They don't want to be getting wet. We're looking at the access, looking at the parking, then navigating the way through the property, the corridor widths, door widths, turning circles. And actually, that's something that's really important. Everybody's always referring to, I say everybody, but typically you'll see reference to a 1200 millimetre turning circle or 1500. That's actually very, very outdated now. And that comes from somebody relying on a wheelchair, managing that chair by themselves. It doesn't take into account if you have a carer standing behind a tendon-propelled chair, a tilt-in space chair. All of those things add to the overall length. So all of that needs to be factored in, as well as the manual handling tasks, the moving handling, the space for support workers to assist with that. So I'm basically looking at all those tasks that are taking place throughout the day and working out what are the needs over and above their pre-injury needs.
So what you're suggesting is generally more space is going to be required. And can you be more specific about rooms that might be needed and what they might be needed for?
So a lot of clients, when they are medically stable and they are then moving back into the community from their rehabilitation or hospital, are going to require ongoing rehabilitation in the form of having therapists coming into the property, extra equipment for their rehabilitation programs, their physiotherapy treatment programs. All of that takes up considerable space. And what clients tell us frequently is they don't want that in the main family living areas. So it's really important for them, and obviously the therapists themselves, to have somewhere, a very specific dedicated environment to do those activity programs. So that is often in the form of a separate therapy room where they've got that equipment, where everything is set up, where they don't have to keep getting equipment in and out, where it's there, it's set up, it's ready to go, but also where it's away from distractions, away from other aspects of family life, because again, it can be intrusive having that in the main family living areas. So it's important to have a separate space for that. Storage of equipment, because these pieces of equipment are very bulky, and more often than not, they've got 2 or 3 different chairs for various purposes. So it's, where are those going to be when they're not being used? Kitchens, for example, obviously we then need to look at adapting that kitchen. If that person is willing and wanting, it's still important that they're able to participate in meal preparation, then we need to look at how can that kitchen support that. And we can be obviously then considering sort of a height adjustable units, lower ovens, variable height worktops, so that they can still fully engage in those meaningful activities that they want to do. But again, that requires more space, because you've got to consider the circulation space for turning the wheelchair around, access, knee space underneath the worktops. So bathrooms are, again, another big area that we get involved in. Level access shower rooms for clients, or specialist baths, particularly for children, because obviously for young children it's still very much, bathing it's fun. It's an activity that there's a lot of therapeutic value in. And again, we are doing those assessments for actually considering the additional support that child needs within the bath, but also about the working environment for the carers that are in there, because obviously when they're coming into somebody's home and they're paid, that's their place of work. And under Manual handling regulations, where there is a risk, a risk that's been identified, then that needs to be lowered to the lowest level reasonably practicable. And so equipment sometimes goes in, obviously, to meet that legal requirement. So height adjustable bath. So obviously the child is or adults, because again, a lot of therapeutic value in being immersed in warm water, but also it might just still be their preference. I think we've always assumed that all older people just want a level access shower. Well, actually, the assessment comes back to what's their preference, what's their priority, what would they like to be able to do, and their choice. So this equipment, it's dual purpose. It's obviously to meet the clinical requirements, but obviously around the manual handling and the legislative responsibilities we've got there.
That's really, really helpful. I think people often don't appreciate the amount of space that's needed. And following on from that, when there's a care package and you might have one or two carers and they might be nighttime care as well, how would you accommodate a client's carer and the carer's needs and the client's needs too, so that the whole thing can work harmoniously?
That's quite a complex one, actually. So again, it comes back to the assessment, identifying, are these waking carers? How many carers is there going to be? One sleeping, one waking. So I need to ascertain what the requirement is in terms of room provision. So do we need 2 bedrooms for the carers, or do we need one office for, say, a waking carer and 1 bedroom for the sleep-in? So that's, again, identifying that from the assessment. Factoring in, again, sort of proximity to thinking this is about the layout of the property. Where is the client's bedroom? Where do the carers need to be? Presumably in proximity for expedient access to them. The other thing that is really important that I found is families wanting that degree of separation from the care team. So they acknowledge the importance and the value and how essential having those carers in. And for them to have their own facilities, so as well as the bedroom, the office, having their own bathroom space for keeping that, that sort of personal care privacy between the family, the client, and the care team. And kitchenette facilities as well, so that, these carers are on shift, they could be there between 4 hours and 24 hours. They're going to need breaks, they're going to need refreshments. And having a space where they're self-sufficient and not in the family's private living spaces. That's, again, very, very important. And I think it just makes family life easier to manage. So it's getting that list of requirements that this client needs, as well as their own accommodation needs. It's what does the care team need? And then adding up, is once you start adding up all those number of rooms, the floor area, the spatial requirements of those rooms, it actually becomes pretty monumental when we're told to go and find a single story property. And then factoring in that they often come as part of a wider family. There might be, if it's a paediatric case, there might be other siblings. So you might be looking for, a 5 or 6 bedroom house, plus the family living areas, the dining room, the kitchen, utility room, then all the other ground floor facilities for the carers. It's quite a substantial property you start looking for. But this all comes back to that very, very detailed assessment and liaising with the wider treating team as well, and working collaboratively, because I can identify that a therapy room or a sensory room is needed. Sometimes they do need to be separate because they've got very different pieces of equipment. But I need to be informed exactly what equipment is going in, and the sizes of this equipment, because just seeing a therapy room written down on paper, there's no context to it. I don't know how much space around each item of equipment. Is it gym equipment? Is it sensory equipment? Is it sort of like a standing frame where it's going to be hoisted transfers into that. So, and then you need space for the 2 carers to work around that, which could be very different from a child, say, with a brain injury, but maybe more independently mobile, not requiring wheelchair access, and actually can manage in a slightly smaller area. So knowing the room sizes is absolutely critical when I'm reviewing the current accommodation and what the future accommodation is going to be, because it needs to be very, very specific for that client. It's not just a one-size-fits-all.
Thank you. It's really, really helpful. I think as well you've dealt with this, but there's the common myth, and I've had the odd barrister say to me, there's no accommodation claim because client doesn't have any issues with mobility, which I think is a complete nonsense. And you've just spoken about a child who may not have mobility needs, but has sensory issues, therapy needs, might also have a care package. They still have an accommodation claim, don't they?
Yes, absolutely, because those needs still require, it all comes down to space. So even if they've got therapists coming in, as you said, they may not require a wheelchair or have a rollator, but they're still having speech and language therapists, physiotherapists coming into the property to do treatment programs several times a week. And that needs to be done in a very, very specific location. And often, if a child is very easily distracted, there are other siblings running around, then it's fully justifiable that they have a dedicated room for those activities to take place. But also, if there are carers coming in, they may not stay overnight. But again, they're there during the day. They need to have a breakout space where they're going to have their rest breaks, write their notes, those sorts of things. Again, and it's not unreasonable that is done in an appropriate area away from the main family reception areas.
I totally agree. And I think our experience tells us that if you have these separate spaces, rehabilitation is optimised. You give your clients the very best chance of fulfilling their potential, but also you can retain really good carers and support staff because they've got their own privacy, family have their privacy, so they're better able to tolerate what is quite an intrusive setup with a full care and therapy package and people coming in and out of your house. If someone's coming to make a cup of tea when you've had a busy day at work and you're sitting in the kitchen, that's quite stressful. We don't really think about it, but it must be. So having those separate spaces is key. And for a client to have a team that stays around for a long time and gets to know their needs and how to meet them is so much better than having revolving doors of people coming through. So everything you're saying makes total sense.
Yeah, and also I think it's important to consider the impact that having different personnel coming into the property, whether that's the carers, the professionals, the impact that has on other family members as well. So it could be, our clients' siblings, or even a partner, husband, wife. I've had many cases actually where, certainly in the paediatric cases, where the siblings, they've just sort of retreat to their bedrooms and they're just spending more and more time in their bed. Now, we all know that's where, teenagers spend their life in their bedroom. But, you don't want that to happen until it absolutely has to. And, we want to set up an environment where a child or a sibling isn't feeling forced into their rooms, because actually, as you say, it is incredibly intrusive having different people come into the house. There's no choice about that happening. That's essential for the family members' needs. And I think it also coming back to about retaining familiar care team members. If you've got the right environment for them to work in there, they are much more likely to stay. But if you've got agency workers, you don't know who's going to be coming in. So again, having those separate spaces where they can come in, fulfill their duties, their responsibilities, but it's not like someone coming down the stairs thinking, not knowing who is going to be in their house. And so when we're looking at design and layout of these properties, we try very hard to think about sort of the zoning, that degree of separation, that privacy. It's not about isolating the client in the least. Absolutely. Obviously, we want them a fully inclusive environment. But there are areas which are just for the care teams and those professionals, because obviously, they're coming into people's own homes. It isn't a public space, it's a family home, and that's what we need to remember.
That makes perfect sense. So now I'm going to ask Michael to tell us a little bit about the magic he works, because I think this is a really threatening experience, actually, because when you hear about all the various needs, someone might think, well, this is going to feel like a rehabilitation centre, not a home. So Tess finds the suitable property, and then it comes to you, Michael. How do you make it meet the client's needs, but also feel like home? Because that's a huge challenge.
It absolutely is a challenge. And I think it's something that we have to keep at the forefront of our mind when we start designing. It always has to be about the client's needs, about the client's life moving forward, and ensuring that they are given the opportunity to continue existing in a way that is as close to what they had experienced previously. I think that's really important. So fundamentally, when Tess has provided a scope of rooms, things that we need to provide, we've often had a discussion previously about layout in a property that we have found. We will start to set out the spaces as best we can with the space that's available. Often it is compromise. There are always compromises to be had. Unfortunately, perfect properties don't exist. But what is important is that the client is involved in that process, and they understand the complexities of what we're trying to achieve. So, often we are saying to clients, it's probably not the best idea to put a room there or in this form or this shape, and we probably can achieve it in a better way. And I find that when clients understand the thinking behind it, they do kind of support that process, and you can have that logical discussion. What I then find moving on from there is to try and re-energise the client by making sure that their design choices are included in that process, and you're asking them the right questions. I think often architecture is seen as an egotistical profession. Ego is king, often. And I find that, especially working with people's homes, you have to lead with empathy. Empathy is the key skill when designing a home for someone. And it doesn't matter whether they are disabled or not. You have to ask the right questions. And I think that with that and listening, you have to listen to the responses as well. You can start to build a picture of who they are, because ultimately what you're looking for is personality and trying to incorporate their personality into that home. And that is through colours, textures, finishes, and all of those things that really represent a person. So, walking in today and seeing you with your beautiful pink earrings and your pink jumper, it's looking for those things, and you have to notice it, because if you don't notice it, you're going to miss out. You might just go, let's just do magnolia everywhere, and that's detriment to the client.
And how do you manage to have the aesthetic appeal of the property, so it's really lovely and feels like home, but balancing that with the clinical and therapeutic needs? So, for example, the equipment Tess was talking about. Yeah. And I know some equipment can be shut away in a room and there will be a dedicated storage room, but other equipment like hoists, rails, handles are more obvious. How do you deal with that? Because some people struggle with that aesthetically.
Yes. So I think the nice thing is that we are moving into an age where things like handles on walls, support handles, they are becoming a lot nicer to look at. We do have some really good suppliers making some really lovely things. It isn't just kind of white plastic anymore. We've got kind of handles that integrate with bathrooms in terms of colours and finishes. So you can get brushed brass, you can get nickel, chrome. Often they have knurled handles rather than just smooth polish. So you've got this lovely detailing coming in. I think the other thing is things like, say, ceiling mounted hoists they are intrusive, and there are ways of hiding them if you want to. But I personally find in a room that has a ceiling track hoist, it's going to be seen at some point. And the importance is that you have other things in that room going on. So, you might have a feature wall that's in a really bright colour, or, the furniture might be of a certain style that will enhance the space. I think that what you're trying to do is limit the amount of clinical elements in the room by amping up all of the other things that are there, making sure that everything else is full of personality. When you walk into a hospital, everything does feel clinical because it's all clinical and there is no personality. It's grey, it's white plastics, it's all of the things that you associate with the hospital. When you walk into a home, an adapted home, you will have clinical items, but it's the interplay between the clinical and the domestic and making sure that it doesn't skew too much in one direction.
So it's very design heavy, isn't it? Because it's an interior design brief in some ways.
Absolutely. I mean, I think not every person who's designing in the industry will have the same approach that I have. I think every designer has a different take on what they provide. I am very much focused on, as I've said, the empathy of making a connection with a client and ensuring the deliverable is something that they are overjoyed with. It should be a feeling of finally coming home. And I think many of our clients undergo such long processes before they get to their final accommodation that it should bring an element of joy in that final moment, that moving on period. It's a setting free for them to then continue the rest of their lives.
But also this is a long-term option, isn't it? Very rarely can they move again, and the bespoking of the property is an expensive process and something we claim for, but we can only claim for it once. So it has to be right, really.
I just wanted to come back and pick up on something you've said, if that's okay.
Of course, Tess.
Coming back to the design and the aesthetic, when I first started out many years ago, we had to say, and it was very much, well, it's function over form. These are your choices. It's a bit like any colour you like, as long as it's brown or white. Hoists in particular, very, very big and bulky. And it was like, well, I'm sorry, it looks ugly, but it's here to serve a purpose. Fortunately, over the years, manufacturers and suppliers have really listened to clients' views on this, because at the end of the day, they're the ones using this equipment and it's being imposed on them. There is a lot more choice, and you're absolutely right, Michael. I think sometimes it's about, having that equipment in place and using other items within the room to, I guess, almost sort of detract from this big piece of clinical equipment. But, we can look at other ways of recessing rails, sort of having them as flush to the ceiling as possible. Hoist motors and the units, they are now becoming more streamlined. They, and again, often there's a little bit more costly. But there is more choice. There's more options out there. They are more aesthetic. They're a bit sleeker. And I said to you earlier on about a solution we had where we created a recessed area within a wall to close the hoist unit away when it wasn't in use. Again, because that was very, very important to this client. I mean, she had some beautiful soft furnishings in the room, but even that wasn't enough for her. She wanted everything out of sight. And we did our absolute best to meet that need and requirement. So, yes, I think it's working together, from Michael's side of things, of looking at the design, the aesthetics, the finishes, and for us looking as clinicians at the equipment options and not just going for, sort of the cheapest. It's if it's justifiable and it's going to meet the need, then, we will fight tooth and nail to get that for that client.
So I sense the both of you, there is this harmony to how you work and you're really quite aligned. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think when I came into the business a couple of years ago and met Tess for the first time, I realised that we had quite a similar approach in what we were seeking to deliver for our clients. We're always focused on the best outcome, which I think is probably the link between us.
Yes, absolutely. I always call you an honorary OT. Just your core principles and values and vision are so aligned. I know I use that word a lot, but actually I can come to you with a property, and even if I've not explained it very well, you still know what I'm trying to achieve, and which certainly makes my job a lot easier.
I mean, I hope so. I think design is a skill, and being able to see layout is something that not everyone can do, and being able to kind of envision something very, very rapidly and say, yes, this works, no, this doesn't. And I love working with you because I think that one of the things that is very key is you specifically as a housing occupational therapist, you will listen, and I can give you feedback and we can have that discussion about, I don't think this is the right approach. I think this might be a bit better. And you never feel like I'm coming for you. Like it's never like you don't see it as an attack.
No, I'm thinking of that one of our jobs over in Oxford.
Yes.
When I had drawn out a concept plan, presented it to you, and you saw a more effective way of achieving what we needed to, and came back to me, and I just thought, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Because at the end of the day, it was that layout, that design was going to work better for our client, but it still had all the essential elements to meet the clinical and therapeutic needs for the client and the care team. And so, I don't feel that my toes were trodden on at all. It's that collaboration.
Yeah, collaboration is
we got there very quickly as well. We did.
And collaboration is so important, and having that interplay and being able to say, I see what you're trying to achieve.
Yes.
And this is what I think is going to work.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we as a company do really, really well, because you are in-house, because you are present.
Yes, yes.
It's so much easier to have those conversations.
Definitely. And I think it's a lot more streamlined and expedient for the client. Yes. Because before I worked for this company and I was working independently and everything was sort of outsourced, I could be waiting several days or weeks for a reply back to a request or feedback on an idea. But equally, some of the colleagues that I worked with in the past, there wasn't that sort of, I guess, not initiative. That's not the right word, because I don't want to devalue them in any way. But it was like they would only do what they were asked of by me, whereas you will be proactive. Well, in fact, everybody in our team they're proactive, because obviously we're all working for the same client. But if I've maybe missed something, or you can see a more efficient way of a property working, you'll suggest that rather than just leave it and say, well, you didn't ask for that. Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask you both, I mean, you speak about what you do with such passion, but what do you find most enjoyable and fulfilling about what you do, Michael?
I think for me, it's always been about creating homes for people. So the home is a really important place for all of us. It's where we live our lives. It's the stage we play on. And everyone deserves to have a safe and secure environment that they call home. And I think that's especially more important when someone has undergone sometimes an extreme level of trauma, and they have become vulnerable through experience in life. And I think that's where my passion stems from, is ensuring that people are safe and secure in their homes, and that they have these places that enable them to continue living their lives. That has always been the case. That has been the fundamental principle of my career. I love creating homes for people, and that's where my passion stems from.
Thank you. And Tess?
For me, it's it's so closely linked to Michael. You know, we're on the same page, actually.
It's why we get on so well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we've got the same vision for our clients. It's seeing them being able to move forward with their lives again through the environment. You know, when I get instructed on cases, you know, they're living in very, very cramped, unmanageable conditions imposed by the property that they're in. And actually quite a few of them they're denied sort of that rehab potential because there just isn't enough space for that fantastic piece of equipment that we all know would make such a difference to them, but there's just no room. Or parents at sort of crisis point where they are in desperate need of care, but there is no space for a care package to be put into a property. So me working with clients to find them properties that are enabling and that will make such a difference, whether it is on a rental basis or a purchase, just to be able to see that some difference and some change can be made is absolutely fantastic.
It's the fundamentals as well for me. It's, you know, can this person undertake personal care? Can they wash themselves? Can they make food for themselves? Rehabilitation is fantastic, and that's obviously really, really important. But a lot of the time, these people have these accidents, and they can't even perform. If they're capable, they can't even perform basic care for themselves because their houses don't allow it. And everyone should be able to make a cup of tea. Everyone should be able to make a slice of toast. Everyone should be able to wash themselves. Yeah. And they're just fundamental principles that we should be able to meet for people.
I agree. We know that the more independent one can be, even if there are limitations, but the more independent you can be, the better your quality of life. Yes. So the environment is really therapeutic, isn't it? And what you both do is so transformative and life-changing. I thank you both for all of our clients and your clients, because it's wonderful work and I've seen it personally. It's so good. And thank you both so much for giving your time today and sharing with me what you do. It's really been really, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
it's been a fantastic experience. It's just, I hope I've done our profession justice.
You have, Tess. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Please click and subscribe to your podcast provider. And thank you again.